Donna here from the Everything Saxophone Podcast. I'm really excited. My guest today is someone that I've known for quite a while, but we've never gotten the opportunity to get him on the podcast, and we finally got him here after we hung out at NAMM extensively at the NAMM Show 2026. So I'd like for you to meet Saxophone Warrior Chris Ward. He's an awesome player. He's got massive, crazy range, and he knows a lot about a lot of things. He knows a ton about a lot of things. He's helped me with a bunch of things too. So welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah. We're just gonna have a fun chat here, but I want people to get to know you first. You know, your background. When did you get started in music? Where did you grow up? So yeah, let's talk about that, your background.
Yeah, I grew up in Connecticut, in a small town called Westport, Connecticut, which I'm sure, depending on what year you talk about people, I grew up there when it was more of a blue collar town. Now it's very much like super rich part of the country.
Wow.
But when I was there in the 80s and 90s, it was like kind of a middle class beach town. But basically, I went to Staples High School and I started playing saxophone when I was 9. I started violin before that, but I didn't really learn any violin. I basically held a violin for a year at 8, and a little bit of piano. But I basically played saxophone for the first 5 years, sort of only at band. So it was basically one of those things where they bring you to a room when you're in middle school and they have all the instruments and they say like, "What do you want to play?" And I looked at each thing and I just was like, I don't know. And I saw the keys on the saxophone and I was like, okay, I'll go for that. I didn't really have like an inclination or something that was exciting me about it. I just thought it looks cool. It has buttons on it. Let's just go with that. Um, and then when I was getting ready to go to high school, we did this whole field trip where they bring you in and then they present like the performing arts. So they'll have like the actors do like kind of monologues and different short things. And then the jazz band played. And that was my first time hearing somebody actually sound good on their instrument. And that sort of excited me. So I approached that person. His name was Nick Ordway. He actually became a film director. I'm
Wow.
not sure. I haven't caught up with him in some years. He doesn't really play saxophone too much anymore. But I approached him and befriended him, and he got me my first teacher. But he also sold me my first Omnibook because he had an extra copy of it. So I bought it off him. And that was kind of my beginning of my foray into like, okay, I'm going to actually put some work into this. And that was kind of like the jump pad to like trying to listen to as much jazz and other stuff as I could and get into it.
You know what's interesting about that? When I was interviewing Augie Bello,
Mm.
who I know from my days working in Syosset. So he got an Omnibook when he was very young too, and we were talking about that. There's a video of him when he's really young playing Charlie Parker. I don't know if you saw
Oh,
that.
really? I did. I got to ask him about it because I try to go to his jam as much as I can, but because I told you I hurt my back and stuff after NAMM, I finally made it out last week. We just posted some videos from the Bellow Bash, as he
Oh,
calls
cool.
it, at the Groove. But yeah, no, I really like Augie. He's a great dude. I got to ask him about that though, because I didn't know that.
Yeah, remind me. I'll send you that link. We've got the link actually in the show notes for the episode with Augie. So you'll definitely want to check that out because it's cute, but it's interesting. It's interesting how both of you, you got the Omnibook, and that's some of your first forays into jazz. And if you would say that it's different than most people who would start off with like a blues scale or something like that. You started like, heavy hitting stuff.
Well, so I I started there, but when I got my first couple lessons with my first teacher, Fred Sherbo, who he got me I believe it was Jerry Coker, the Patterns for Jazz book.
Got it. Yeah.
That was my first book where it was just learning triads and seventh chords and stuff. And I was learning those things, but I didn't fully understand at the time what I was learning. Because it's funny to look back on it now, being like, it's so simple, but for some people, it just takes time to like digest harmony and like understanding stuff like that. Because at the time I was like prior to saxophone, my musical tastes, I was very much into like electronic music, David Bowie, Nine Inch Nails, like
Okay.
Bjork, all these different artists. And then when I got into jazz, it very much became this hyper focus where I only listen to that. And now in my later years, I've returned to like my true loves, which is like Nine Inch Nails and like all my electronic elements. But
Oh, cool.
I had these early days where I was just like polarizingly just studying jazz. Like I was into Bird, then I was into Cannonball, and then Cannonball was like my favorite player. Then I started playing tenor, and of course, when I heard Brecker for the first time, it ruined everything. So it was pretty much like have to study as much Brecker as humanly possible, Bob Berg, and like just checking out as many players as possible in high school, and then off into college and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you were a child of the 90s then, I guess, like, with that whole Nine Inch Nails type of thing. Were you into the grunge stuff too, or more the electronic
Yeah,
stuff?
so I was born in 82. So I
Okay.
remember I watched all of like when the what was it, the Buggies, the Buggles, when like Video Killed the Radio Star and like
Yeah.
everything on MTV. So I saw it all. I saw like when Cobain passed, when it was on the news and Kurt Loder was on TV, and like that was a big deal to me. Like I had Nevermind's first record on cassette, and like
Mhm.
before the CD flip had just been going. I actually was just my partner sent me this video that's talking about a micro generation of people born in 77 to 83, where we've experienced like the first 10 years of our life was analog, and then we had the shift to digital. And it was kind of an interesting take on it. Not to get on a diatribe about that, but like, yeah, it was just like interesting to think about going through like vinyl to cassette to CD to
Right.
MP3s in such a short period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too, just to go off subject as well, but like at the Grammy Museum out here, they were showing the evolution of everything, and you got a chance to hear, the differences between all of the different media. I lived through that. I lived through
Yeah.
all of that stuff too. But what's interesting, going back to Kurt Cobain, like I remember I was in my car when, they announced that he passed, that he killed himself, and I just, I love Nirvana. I like grunge, and it was just really upsetting, you know. But it was definitely, definitely not a turning point for me in any way, shape, or form, but it definitely affected me. I mean, I never forgot that, you know.
Yeah.
But Nine Inch Nails is cool too. I like that some of that '90s music as well. I tend to like the Pearl Jams and that kind
Pearl
of thing.
Jam's great. I mean, Trent's been my jokingly favorite sax player outside of Bowie because like I've seen Nine Inch Nails a handful of times. I just saw them again last week, and I forget what year it was. I think it might have been 2017, 2018. I saw them in Brooklyn at King's Theater, and he played saxophone on a lot of the tracks because Trent
Wow.
was a saxophone player in high school. So there's a lot of like hidden samples of saxophone throughout Nine Inch Nails music, which I'm just finding out later as an adult. But knowing that Bowie obviously was a saxophonist and like how he incorporated it into his music, and then them collaborating on the tours that they did and Are You Afraid of Americans, and just seeing like the pivot points, like those are the kind of sax players that like I look up to a lot, like outside of jazz, where it's just like they're handling so much music in like different ways.
Interesting, interesting. And so I'm gonna go back though.
Mhm.
You're in high school. You're going through the Omni book. Then you hit all these other saxophone players, and then Brecker. What was a turning point for you where you decided that you wanted to perhaps go into music or explore it more or get deeper into it?
Well, that's a partially funny, partially pseudo sad story. What happened was I was doing a lot of visual art, and I had a hard drive that failed that had my whole portfolio on it. And
Oh,
I was like trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I was doing a lot of 3D art and rendering and different things. And I had an old like Gateway 2000 computer. I can't remember if it was the Gateway or the Dell that I had, but I had Norton Utilities installed, which will date me, obviously, how old I am. But I had like Norton Utilities installed, and it was telling me my hard drive was not readable.
oh my
And
God.
And I went through this whole thing. I had to format, I lost everything, and then the issue happened again, and then I found out I could have fixed it and I could have saved everything. So it
Uh-huh.
was this kind of like detrimental moment of like that was everything I would have submitted to a college. So I kind of had this moment of like, what am I going to do? Because I didn't know what I wanted to do at that point. And I just said, I guess I'm going to go for it. And I only applied to two schools. I went to Ithaca for an audition, and my grades weren't good enough to get into Ithaca. So then I doubled backed. I applied to Berkeley. I got in and just kind of weathered the storm and went to Boston and sort of embraced it. I'm glad I went to Berkeley because it was a very diverse community and stuff.
What years did you go to Berkeley?
2000 to 2005. I had extended my
Okay.
last year because again, I didn't really have a plan other than I wanted to go to New York. But I stayed an extra year so I could audition for the Monk Institute and stuff, which I didn't get in. I didn't make any of the placement or anything, and I just sort of figured out what my plan was. So I came to New York after that and did my master's at NYU.
Got it. Okay, cool. And when you were at Berkeley, like um what was performance your major, or did you do
Yeah,
something else? Okay,
I did
cool.
performance, and I basically I took as many ensembles as I could. My favorite teacher was Hal Crook. He's a
Okay.
trombonist, piano player. He retired, but basically, I fought really hard to get into his ensembles. Anyone that knows Hal or knows his teaching knows that it's like he was a no BS kind of teacher that like if you got in, then he respected you, and there was amount of like you had to put the work in, and like he would show you the way and everything. But like he was my favorite teacher. I studied with Joe Lovano too because he came into Berkeley and did some ensembles and stuff.
Okay.
And he was great as well. I learned a lot from Joe, but Hal was like I really appreciated that he was tough but fair, where he wasn't like a kind of like some teachers will just say you sound great, and it's kind of like to me that's not constructive. Like I don't need you to tell me I sound good, but I need you to like acknowledge here's the assignment, here's what I want you to do. If it's not good, tell me it's not good, and like kind of like constructively give me feedback. And I feel like a lot of music teachers, which is a bigger topic, is like they don't always want to teach. They just want to be like, that sounds good. And I'm just like telling me that doesn't give me a job, nor does it help me when you're on a gig and someone tells you it doesn't sound good, because you need to have constructive feedback like on the bandstand or whenever it comes up.
Yeah, that's the power and the importance of constructive feedback, and not necessarily destructive, where I've had the opposite experience where teachers, not private teachers, but, like I was classically trained. So there were orchestra teachers that, man, it was just bad news. I mean, they would just like
Yeah.
really rip you apart for no reason other than it made them feel good. And that's not the purpose of music. That's not the purpose of being a teacher either.
No, and I think you can be tough though. Like I know we'll get into it in a bit, like when I studied with Lenny Pickett, because he was a very hard teacher, but he came from a very tough background and he really worked to get where he's gotten to as his legendary status is. But there's something to be said for just being stern but fair, but also acknowledge like they're like what your priorities are as a student to a teacher and knowing that you have responsibilities as well. And if you're ever complaining or something else, the teacher needs to check you and make sure like, this is my job, this is your job, and we have to meet in the middle and like work on stuff.
That's a great perspective because this is interesting. A lot of times people feel that when they go to take lessons from a teacher, they want a teacher that's structured. They don't want a teacher that's necessarily going to be like, especially it also depends on your skill level. Like if you're advanced, you're going to the teacher, you have one specific thing you want to work on. You're not necessarily going to study with them for years at a time. It may be a few times or whatever. When you're just starting out, you want a teacher that's structured. The teacher shouldn't be asking you, what do you want to work on? That's like taking a 2-year-old to Carvel for the first time and saying, what ice cream flavor do you want?
Yeah.
They have no idea. But in terms of getting feedback but also working with teachers, the student does have a responsibility to be self-aware. When you reach a certain point, like when you start getting more intermediate stage, I would say, you're not going to necessarily control the lessons per se, but you do want to say in them, but you want someone with structure. But if you're just coming to them and expecting the teacher to do everything for you, you're not going to get much out of that.
I think there's a line though. My personal preference for when I do teach is that I like to find out what the student, it doesn't matter what age they are, what level they are, but like, what do you listen to? Why do you want to play the saxophone? Is it a hobby? Do you actually want to play? Like, what's your deal? Because the one thing I wish I could have experienced differently is that when you get stuck per se with like a jazz teacher, depending on what their background is, they might proselytize like that particular
Oh, I know what you're saying.
school of thought.
Okay.
Like, there's very much like, if someone's really a diehard like Lenny Tristano fan, they might only listen to that part of jazz. And that's the only thing they're going to show you. They're going to show you Warren Marsh, they're going to show you Lee Konitz, they're going to show you Tristano, and nothing else. And it becomes this thing where it's like, I get it. Everyone's got their thing. Some people it's going to be Coltrane, some people it's going to be the lineage of like, you'll go Coltrane, Steve Grossman, Dave Liebman, Brecker. You'll study this lineage of players. You have like the George Coleman thing. Like, and then if you're studying smooth jazz, you'll have different eras of players. But I think for me, I like to study everybody because I feel like if a student comes to me and I'm not the right person, I'll say to them, well, I know who's in the scene and like, what do you want to do? So if you want to play smooth jazz, I'll be like, here's 10 of my friends that do this really well, because I feel like it's owed to the student to also not, like, I can show you how to ride a bike. I can show you how to do different stuff. But if you want to do a certain kind of technique that's not my wheelhouse, I'd rather direct you to that thing. Because a lot of players, yes, you're totally right that they might not know what they want to do. So you can show them scales, you can show them intervals, you can, find out what their tastes are, and that's totally fine. But if you see like a clear thing from the get-go, like, I've had students that clearly were amateurs that just wanted to play saxophone, and they were like, "Can you transcribe this Kenny G solo for me?" And I was like, "No, I can show you how to transcribe the solo, but it's
Yeah.
not my job to transcribe it for you."
Yeah, totally
And I
agree.
love Kenny G. I have no problem. Like, a lot of jazz guys hate Kenny G and all this stuff, but like, never met him, but I know I like his vibe. I like what he stands for. I like how he's worked on stuff and his confidence. But if a student wants to learn something, I'm like, I'll show you how to transcribe it, and then you can put the work in and learn whatever you want to learn.
I totally agree with that. And the thing is this too. You're not If you're having the teacher do the transcribing for you, you're not learning. You're not learning that really important skill of learning how to play by ear and developing your ears. And yeah, it's hard. Of course it's hard at first.
So I was terrible at it. Like, it took me a really long time, even through college, where I slowly started transcribing stuff. And I had a good teacher, um, I took a wind ensemble with him. I'm spacing on his name, but basically he said, transcribe pop music. If you're having trouble transcribing saxophone on jazz or whatever, transcribe
Yep.
bass lines for pop songs. Do like the most simple thing you can do. So you start with that, and then I tell a lot of students to move on to like Chet Baker, because Chet Baker is mostly chord tones with some approach techniques, slight chromaticism, and you can sing it. So there's like, My Funny Valentine, you go into his other things. There's just like simple solos you can listen to. And then I say, like, then check out like Lester Young. Lester Young, a lot of pentatonics, a lot of diatonic playing, and you can get something out of that. Instead of like a lot of people will go to like straight to craziness, and they're like,
Yeah.
if they can't hear it, then they get frustrated, and it's just like, well, you got to build up to it.
Yeah, isn't it it's crazy how people when they try to learn music, they don't know what they don't know. And so they're going to go for the hardest thing and thinking that, and here's the thing, I love YouTube, don't get me wrong, but YouTube in a variety of ways has made it difficult for a lot of people because when you're watching all these guitar teaching videos and it's very visual, I mean, you're supposed to be using your ears too, but it's very visual. A lot of people that don't know what they don't know think that they could approach the saxophone that way. Oh, let me see
Yeah.
your fingers. It's nothing to do with the fingers. It has to do with, many other things when it comes to playing. So it kind of does a disservice in a sense, and it makes people think that, just give me the transcription and then I'll play it. And then what they don't realize is when they play the transcription and it doesn't sound anything close to what they've heard on the radio, it's because you use your eyeballs more than your ears.
Well, a lot of those books too are wrong. Like there's certain transcription books I learned later, like the Omni book too, that there's a lot of mistakes in the Omni book. And there are times where I've gone back and retranscribed Charlie Parker solos, and you learn a lot more about the phrasing when you see it and write the phrases out yourself. And you sort of like notice like, oh, these chords were wrong when I looked at it, and now I have a totally different perspective of like what he might have been thinking about.
Yeah, for sure.
Or articulations, because most of us in those early transcription books, unless they're really thorough, there's articulations that are missing. Sometimes there's chord changes that are missing. I tell a lot of beginner transcribers, they the one thing I was guilty of it too in the beginning is they'll transcribe part of it, and I'm like, you got to do all of it. It's hard, but like you got to do the articulations, you got to do where the chords fall, because if you're going to analyze it later, like when you get into like bebop scales and theory and all that, the whole point of like seeing the chromaticism is where the chord tones, where the downbeats are, because then you see where the chords are outlined and everything else.
Yeah, you know what? Let me do this. Let's go back to, you went to Berkeley, and then after Berkeley, you went to New York, right? So what was the plan for you? Were you going to go into music full time? Like, what were you thinking?
I've always, I mean, still to this day, trying to do it full time has been the goal. I mean, I've been fortunate to have other skill sets, which I'll get into in a bit. But I basically I wanted to come to New York, and I think like most people, you have this false dream where most institutions don't actually provide you the skills of like how to get work. They just kind of, you go to college, you play a bunch of sessions, you hang with a bunch of teachers, and then nobody prepares you for the job market. Nobody tells you like what the secret is, what the hustle is. You kind of are left to your own devices to figure that out. So I came to New York, started getting my master's at NYU, and then tried to get as much information and hang with my peers there as I could, and did some gigs, but like nothing really like took off per se. Um, my biggest gig, so to speak, that I started towards the end of NYU is that I met Felix Pastorius, and we started a band together. We had two bands, Hipster Assassins and this other band called Social Experiment, and that sort of overlapped where my day gig career kind of started. And I've had two careers, so to speak, in sort of in tandem, where when I was young, I basically taught myself how to take apart computers and put things together, and sort of had this sort of like natural ability with technology. And I didn't go to school for any of that, but it ended up being that I got work as like a web developer and doing like QA engineering and stuff alongside gigging. And I've been fortunate to have both those skill sets. So I started working different jobs like that alongside doing stuff with Felix and his brother Julius, and we started our projects, and we had those going for over 12 years. We had a residency at the Zinc Bar and then the 55 Bar, which is long since gone now, and sort of just in tandem playing with other side people throughout the city, doing wedding gigs, different stuff like that.
So when you started working with Felix, talk about these projects, the type of music, like your approach. Were you both co-writing? Like what was going on?
Yeah, I was bringing songs in of my own. Felix had a bunch of stuff because basically he's from South Florida, and he had a band together with the Bendy brothers, Mike and John Bendy, and his brother Julius. And they came to the city, and he got this residency. We were doing like Mondays at Zinc Bar, and coincidentally, I met Felix's cousin, who was working at 55 Bar, and we befriended each other. And she just texted me one day and was like, "I think you should meet my cousins. They're playing every Monday at Zinc Bar." And I just was like, "Okay." So I came down, and I sat in and it just kind of rolled into this thing where I just started showing up and learning all of their music just on stage. There were no charts, there was no anything. And it was kind of a really nice jumpstart because music school was all about reading, it was all about visualizing and transcribing. But I did my ear training in college, but it wasn't like gig ear training. So
Okay.
it was great in the sense that like everything with Felix was like there were no charts. It was just learn on the gig. So it was really great for that because after like 2, 3 months, I had everything just learning it on on the stage. Like I would take my phone out and just do like a voice memo and just like take the crude recording home, and then I would just transcribe the lines and just come back and just know the songs.
Okay. So is that we all have our definitions of gig ear training, but let's talk a little bit more about this because this is super important for a lot of people who, they're so used to reading everything and then they want to be in cover bands. And then they
Yep.
realize, okay, well, here you go. Here's the YouTube link. And by the way, we do it in a different key. And they're having,
That's a whole, yeah, I still to this day, I tell people this a lot, especially for wedding bands and stuff, is that like if you play Valerie, for example, I've done Valerie in like 6 different keys. It's like you don't know until you get on the gig, like what key you're going to play a lot of tunes in. And sometimes you're not told on a wedding band because it depends on how put together the band is. If you're on a gig, they might not have it together where they're going to tell you anything, or they might completely lay it out ahead that you're going to know all the keys, all the incidentals for the gig. But you kind of have to assume that you're going to be told nothing and you just show up on the gig and it's just like, oh, we're in E flat, or we're in B, or we're in whatever we're in.
wow. Okay. I tend to take gigs where you tell me the keys, you know?
I mean, but it's you take the call. You know when
Yeah.
you're getting called
Wow.
for club date stuff, it's kind of a, you know, you need a gig and you need to make money. And so
Do
when
it.
the phone rings, you're just kind of you just I treat it as you have to be polite, but you also have to make sure you're more. There's the commonplace saying of you have to be more prepared than the band leader, that you always need to show up and just have it together where you know whatever. I believe you should know everybody's parts if you can, and just know like what's the bass player going to do, what's the guitarist doing, what's the keyboard player going to do. So if you show up and there's like a curveball or something's off, you at least know what can I do to save this moment. If there's a reason, I mean horns a lot of the time to save the moment is just stop playing. But it depends because like there's a lot of gigs where you're supposed to come in and no one tells you what key you're in, and all of a sudden you're like, how can I change this? I mean, there's so many songs like I Want to Dance with Somebody where if they don't tell you what key you're in and you start the song, it's going to be either really bad or not, depending on when you come in.
Yeah. No, that can be a train wreck for sure. So let me ask you, let's go down this rabbit hole. Let's say someone, they play fairly well, well enough to be in wedding bands. Like what you're giving us some advice here, but what's some more advice that you can share to people that, that can help give them more success when it comes to, you mentioned like gig ear training and, doing these types of things.
So when it comes to wedding band stuff, I basically I think you have to accept that anything you want done or how you want to be prepared, you should take care of it yourself. Like you should never assume, like if a lot of people like to film themselves when they play, like I have a camera that I mount on my iPad stand because a lot of these gigs, 90% of the time you'll use your iPad and you'll sync the charts that they send you, or you'll have your own charts. And then the other 10% where it's like an upper echelon wedding band, it's all memorized. You can't show up with anything, and they'll give you the charts ahead of time and just let you know like here's the 200 songs we're going to play from, have it all memorized, here are the keys. But those are like the dream pop gigs where you show up and it's like all off book and all that other stuff. But
Right.
generally it's like on my iPad I have like 10 different templates for each band I've played with where they have their own charts, their own keys, their own notes, vibes, and everything. So I usually tell people that are new to it, here's the like 15 songs you should learn right away, like September. Horn players, you have to know September. Valerie, Respect, if you're a saxophonist, At Last, where it's either going to be a trumpet player or you playing the melody and stuff. And there's always times because you don't know when you're doing weddings and stuff where like you might forget something here and there because unless you're doing weddings like every day, you're gonna forget stuff. Like I'm more of a summer wedding guy, so like there are tunes that I'll never forget. But you just have to, as the season ramps up, I start reviewing stuff for when, things happen, just so I'm always prepared. Because it's songs that like once you've heard it a million times and you've played it like 100 times, there's that whole old adage of like 10,000 hours mastering something. I feel like if you played 10,000 hours of weddings, then like that's says something for getting into it. But I generally tell people like here's 15 songs you absolutely have to know, make friends with rhythm section people, go to the wedding band showcases, find out where people are playing. Sort of like in New York right now, there's the club, the Red Lion. A lot of wedding bands do showcases there. Um, Also, just be cool with people. Like if other horn players know you and respect you, and you tell them you're trying to find other work or whatever, at some point someone's going to need a sub, and if they like you, they'll send you on the gig, and you'll get a chance to go. And like aim to be professional, but know that it's not going to go 100% well. Like something's always going to go wrong. You have no way of knowing if you're going to meet a really good crew of people or if you're going to deal with problem people. And like
Yeah.
there's all sorts of stories with dealing with problem people and agencies like with weddings and stuff. But generally, most people I work with are great. But you have to be prepared for how you're going to deal with tough situations.
Yeah. It's just bringing back memories for me for a bunch of situations that I've gone through, for sure. I want to go back to those 15 songs. Would you
Yeah.
also recommend for people to learn them in just about every key, or are there specific
Yeah,
keys?
I mean, I think like September is generally I've only played September in its original key, but I have had different experiences with like every once in a like Sir Duke doesn't always come up. We play Superstition more for like Stevie Wonder songs,
Got it.
but every once in a while it's like when we do Sir Duke, I've definitely done that in like three different keys.
Okay.
I can't remember off the top. I don't. That one only comes up every couple of years, and then I have other friends in other bands where they're like, I play that every gig, and it's very much like every every company has literally their own 200 songs that they call. I
Yeah.
feel like there's everyone's always going to play Valerie, everyone's always going to play the Aretha Franklin stuff and like Superstition, but then you'll have others where there'll be more 90s stuff or there more be more Blink 182 and like there's always something depending on what the target audience is for that company because some bands they're targeting 20 somethings, some you might play with they're targeting like 50, 60-year-old couples. Like you don't know what the audience is till you get on the gig. But for me, it's exciting because there's all these songs where I love when it's like 80s tunes, or sometimes you'll get Louis Prima songs, which I love Louis Prima. And like it doesn't happen often enough, but like when I get on a gig and it's like Motown stuff, I'm happy. I love playing Motown stuff on gigs.
Yeah, yeah, it's nice. I remember doing that, not for weddings, but with some of the bands that I've been in. Because Motown, and out here actually, when I did some subs for concerts in the parks, that was fun. Because
Yeah.
it's fun. It's fun music. It's fun music to play. It's so rhythmic. You know. Well, let me now go into another area over here. So, when did you start getting into? When did you start studying with Lenny Pickett, and then getting into like extended range and stuff?
So by the range has always been a dream goal since I started. I don't know why. I think maybe I had a friend I think who played me Tower of Power and that kind of triggered it. And it was just kind of like, how on earth is this guy doing this? And like, how can I learn how to do that? And then that's how I started getting my neighbors to hate me, which was super fun. But basically, I think the dream seed was planned when I was in high school and I started hearing Lenny with Tower Power, like Squib Cakes and like Soul Vaccination and all the early famous solos of his. But when I got to NYU, I found out he was teaching and it was an opportunity where I could actually sign up to study with him. So I was fortunate to study with him for a year. I had lessons at his house. I had lessons at school. I put ensembles together where he played with us, and it was just a very diverse experience of hearing him in different contextual situations, but also just like having this man's bell 3 feet from my head and just experiencing his range. And because he can go off the piano, he has like a tenth off the piano, and just experiencing it and just being like, whoa, that's like, what is this?
Can you share any tips that stand out, or maybe like the first thing, like when you first started studying with him,
Well,
that
I'll tell you the first lesson I had, I had just moved to New York, um, and financially things weren't great. I was I think I came in and I was complaining about reeds, and like didn't have enough cash to buy breeds and stuff, and he was just like, "Do you think I give a shit?" It's like, this is your this is your responsibility. Like, you have to show up prepared, and I'll never forget it. And I was just like, that's it. That's what I needed. That's what I wanted to hear. I don't like teachers that are like, you sound great and we move past it. I want somebody to call it out and set a precedent of, this is what I need you to do. And so from then on, it's like I have a whole system that I do that's sort of an extension of what he showed me, where I get my reads, I sign and date them when I start them.
okay.
And like, I've been soaking my reeds in water and Listerine since 2006, and I've worked on different things with that, but like I have a whole process. And like, I started signing and dating them like he did because he showed me that, and just knowing rotationally because he rotates like 20 reads, whatever he's
Oh,
doing.
okay,
Like,
got it.
because you have to be prepared, because like
Yeah,
he's on TV, so it's like you have to have your setup be what it needs to be.
yeah.
But we did that, and then we started working on diaphragm exercises where all of his extended range is based on stuff he developed on clarinet, but it's also an extension of doing long tones on the lowest range of the horn, and
Okay.
learning how to build your diaphragm muscles so you can sort of push the airstream to sort of jump off and go into the extreme range. One thing though that he tried to teach me, and I've had other players try to teach me, is circular breathing, which I can't do.
I can't do that
And
either.
I've recently found out, I've been trying to get it fixed, but I have a deviated septum and I have a big blockage on my left side, and
Oh,
I'm pretty 100% sure it's what my whole life why I can't circular breathe is just that I have this blockage where I can breathe fine on my right side, but I can't circulate anything. And it's just part of like what I've dealt with. And I have asthma and stuff, which it's like the saxophone playing's always helped me with breathing, but it was just nice to be validated last year going to the doctor and then seeing them go, do the endoscopy and just being like, oh, I have a blockage in there. I can't afford to get it fixed, but at least I know
you know why?
what's causing all the issues and stuff. But I've always wondered, like, if I get it fixed, am I going to be able to circular breathe? Which would be hilarious if I could. But at this point, I'm kind of like, I do the best that I can. But Lenny does his circular breathing on his lowest notes, and he can do it for like 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever he's doing.
Wow.
And that helps him execute pushing into the extreme range to like the degree that he does, because he has the endurance. Because I can get to a certain point, but because I can't continue to push, that's my kind of like limit that I'm dealing with right now, is that if I could push more air, I could go higher. But I'm dealing with the fact that because I'm at a point where I can't circulate the air to go push more, I'm sort of at that's where I'm at now with what I'm trying to work on. But basically, you do long tones on your lowest note to where you start to feel a tug in your diaphragm. And that's sort of like how he was teaching me that, like, that's the point where you want to push from there, like in your diaphragm. And I've done different exercises over the years. Like, there's the whole, like, the bugle call from like top tones, and Lenny does variations of that as well, where you're just kind of finding the point in your lip when you're circulating like overtones back and forth in different like partials, you can feel almost like a pain or like a prick in your lip, and it's kind of like trumpet players, you can just sort of feel where it is.
Yeah, this is I
And
play trumpet too, so this is a lot
oh,
of
do you?
things.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this especially, a lot of great trumpet players that can play really high, they play extreme low pedal notes, pedal tones.
Yeah.
And that's the whole purpose of it. It's not, it's also written in some music too, to be honest with you. It's some classical pieces, but you need a massive amount of air to get those pedal tones to come out. So this is so interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm only scratching the surface still. Like I studied with him like 20 years ago at this point, which is wild to say
Yeah.
that it's been that long. But I feel like a lot of what he showed me that I've been putting to practice has only been really coming together in the last couple of years. Like I've always played up there, but I feel like I'm making like progress. Like I've always like been in it for the long game, but like I feel like just the last 2, 3 years, things have like shifted. And now I'm sort of at another level of like, okay, what am I supposed to do now? What's
Mhm.
like the next part of this?
What do you feel brought on the shift?
I think just like I've changed my setup a little bit because I was searching for a specific thing. I play Theo Wane mouthpieces. I've been playing them since COVID, since 2020. And prior to that, I had been searching for a specific kind of setup, and I knew what I wanted, but I wasn't able to find it. And I've been thankful for my relationship with the Theo Wane team, who has helped me sort of go on this journey to find what I'm looking for. And I've settled on a mouthpiece now. I'm playing an old Shiba 2,
Okay.
and I love it. And it's given me everything I wanted, and I just feel like, all right, I don't need to change anything. I'm just gonna stay here, and that's a good feeling because a lot
Yes.
of people are gearheads, and they're like they go all over the place, and they're trying to find like what's the next thing, what's the next thing, what's the next thing, and like I would just want to find it and stick with it.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that one. And, in some ways, for a lot of people, it's a lot of fun to try out new things, and it's all cool, it's good. But I feel personally, you want to find something that's going to give you close to what you want, you stick with it, because the stability is the thing. Like Bob Reynolds, like played the same mouthpiece for
Yep,
what, 20 or 30 years or something like that. He only recently changed because I think,
yep.
what did it chip or something? Yeah, it was old.
Yeah, he played that when I knew him at Berkeley. I mean, he was my favorite player at Berkeley for sure. And yeah, I remembered when he was playing on that piece back then, and just seeing him again at NAMM. It had been a while. It's just like he's always been amazing. Always
Oh
had
yeah.
it together, and
Yeah, no, he's definitely got it together. Well, okay, so then Lenny Pickett, then we explored that, and when did you start to get into, I'm going to call it extended techniques, but also using pedals and exploring that route?
so I got into the pedals. Trying to remember if I tried anything in high school. Might have been my first year at Berkeley. I think I bought a multi effects pedal off of somebody, and I couldn't make it work. And I can look back now and I know exactly why it didn't work. But I tried to do a bunch of different things, and it just I didn't have the right gear to match what I had. And like
Okay.
looking back on it, like everyone at the time, it was like you would use a clip-on microphone. Someone, if you were lucky, would tell you to get like an impedance adapter. And for those who don't know, basically you have to take an adapter in certain situations to match the voltage of the signal to make it line level, because you're taking a mic signal into a guitar pedal, and you have to match it to a guitar level, so when it goes out, it sounds balanced.
Interesting.
Now,
Okay.
nowadays, it's a very different experience because I have like an intra mic that I use, which is made by Victor Egia. Or I don't know how he actually says his last name, but he makes these mics that go inside the neck of the saxophone.
Yeah.
A lot,
Okay.
a lot of people use them, and he's a wonderful guy, and his product is just game changing for what it does. But it goes inside the horn, so you don't have to drill like Brecker used to do, and like different guys where they would basically have like a different neck, and they would drill a hole in for the pickup. and do it that way. So basically, it allows you to use a mic in between the mouthpiece and the neck, and then you can just run the cable down the horn, and you can plug directly right into the pedal board. You don't need anything. It matches the signal.
Okay. And
Um,
this reminds me of I had interviewed Doug Levin, and do you
yeah,
know? Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I'm
Yeah,
wondering just
Douglas, he built one of my boards I used to use some
okay.
years back because I still prefer having my pedal board up high at keyboard level. He tried to convince me back then that he wanted it on the floor, and I was like, I don't work that way. So I have a smaller board that I built myself where I use like a laptop stand, and I keep it so I can have it at waist height because
Yeah.
I prefer to tinker with my hands for like different patch sounds and stuff. Um, but where was I going with that?
With
I
Doug.
lost my train of thought.
Yeah, with Doug and
Yeah, no, he had built a board for me when I was with Felix for Hipster Assassins, and it was a great board. But then my COVID happened, and I wanted to downsize because carrying gear and like I wasn't sure of the climate because it was a really big pedal board that I had, and it
mm,
was hard to travel with.
okay.
Because as you know, it's like when you travel, its weight is crucial, or you're just like
Yeah.
out the door. And if you have any cases that are over 50 pounds, you're screwed. It's like another bag fee or an overage fee.
Yeah. But not only that too, though, you're worried about your equipment getting ruined,
Yeah,
especially sensitive equipment. But
yeah.
okay, so I'm glad that you did, yeah, you did have that connection with Douglas because he knows
Well,
his stuff.
prior to that though, I hung with Ben Wendell for some
Okay.
things, and Ben was actually one of the first players who kind of set me on a different journey where I think when I left high school, I had an Audio Technica clip on, and I always had problems with it, and I didn't realize why until later, was that the gain structure on it was just set to super. It was just like the most sensitive mic ever. Like it just was the loudest thing. And I don't think it sounded great. And then he got me, it was a Sennheiser. I'm probably going to be wrong here, but it was like a 603 or something. It was kind of a plastic clip on, but he basically showed me how he would take that and then basically shove that into the bell and just like keep it in there. And those mics were inexpensive and they worked great for a while. My problem with those mics though is that they always broke. I think I broke like three of them over the course of 3 years. Like the
Wow.
structural integrity of the wires just wasn't great for me. After that, I saved up and I got a DPA clip on, which I still have, the 4099. And then I found out about the Intra mic, and once I got that, it was all over. But I've since gotten a pedal from this company in Canada called Templo, which has two inputs. So I can blend the signal of the clip-on mic with the Intra mic. So I can turn off one signal if I want to do like synth effects, and then I could blend the natural sound because the Intra mic's internal, so you're not getting any room sound. You're not getting of the other colors, and that kind of is the only caveat using that mic that bothers me sometimes is that I want to hear the outside sound sometimes, or the key sound, or something else implied. So with this pedal, I literally can just plug in both mics, blend the two, or cut one off, and just go strict effects, then put the DPA back on and have like a blend when I'm doing like reverb and delay effects.
Well,
And then if I'm doing strict synth, shut off so I don't have any bleed over. Because when you're doing synth effects and like fuzz effects, you have issues by overloading the signal chain because you're getting the outside influence. So it won't be like a
okay.
clean sound.
Yeah, there's a lot that's involved with this, and one plug for Doug. I'm making a note here too that I'll put the link for that episode with Doug. He like gave a
Yeah,
master class, like 2 episodes
yeah,
master class on this stuff, and it's really interesting. I honestly I've not used pedals. I guess the types of gigs that I do, some of the types of gigs that I do where we're playing, old style R&B pedals is not
yep,
authentic
yep,
for that
yep.
time for sure. But I what I'd like to do though right now is give me a second here because when you said about how you have your pedals up higher, that reminds me of one of the videos that I wanted to share. So let me do this for a second. And those of you that are in audio, I mean, you're going to hear this, but those of you in video, you're going to see that the hipster assassins, and this is landscapes actually. This is one of the ones I grabbed. And so like at this point in this video, like there's a really cool line, couple of things here that you're really playing that's cool. But we're getting a look at like some of your equipment on this
Yeah,
this
that's the board that Douglas had built for me that we designed together.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, let's take a little bit of a listen to this and maybe I'm going to go back a little bit more. I'm going to go like 7 minutes in or so. And you can start to hear some of the pedal effects and some of this really cool playing. So check this out. So like taking that two-note theme, developing it, putting it in different spots, yeah, developing it for the most part, but even some of the stuff before that with some of the sound effects. And then, then going into, you had some split tone effects there for sure. Yeah, you know what? Talk a little bit about, let me stop the share for 1 second. Talk a little bit about split tones. That's one thing, people say, well, how do you do split tones and all that kind of thing?
So you're implying the multiphonics or
Yeah.
what do you,
All right, all
I
right.
mean,
So yeah, that's true because a lot of times split tones, like a lot of times people do it on an altissimo note and then they'll split the tone.
yeah.
But multiphonics, that's
Yeah,
also different.
so I mean, I I was never able to do, I never put a lot of time into doing like the sort of, I guess it's cliche at this point, the Brecker affectations like on the Altissimo A, where different players would try to do those multiphonic sounds. I don't always think about my upper register for doing those kind of sounds because what I've developed from then, 'cause that I'm trying to remember, it's going to make me feel bad of how much time has passed since that video. Because I see that I'm still playing a Van Doren piece, which is a very long time ago. I think from then to now, I've changed how I think about my upper register because I do a lot of things now where I use my ear, and when I go up high, I'm sort of like dialing in melodies based on what I'm hearing to the chord changes. And it's a little risky, but it's like I can hear where certain things go. Back then, I could hear where my upper range was. To me, it was weak. I felt like my palm keys and stuff when I listened back to that, I just I can hear at least thankfully like the growth from then to now of like where things were. But uh, I hate to not give you like a good concrete answer, but I don't think I was intentionally thinking about split tones or anything in those moments. At that time, I was using a TC Helicon pedal. It was the pedal sitting on the top. It's the Voice Live Touch 2, and there's a great effect on there where you can do stutter effects, where
Okay.
I can play lines, but then there's a touch bar on it where you're able to sort of hold and drag different notes. Um, I've sort of evolved, like I miss using that at times, but it was a great pedal, but the problem was it was something that like using it in conjunction with other pedals because it was a digital pedal. I was running that pedal as my preamp essentially. So when you're structuring a pedal board, especially with horns, you run it. The first pedal is like your mic preamp or whatever is changing the signal to match the impedance level and stuff. And I'm sure Douglas went at length on all of this. And essentially at the time, him and I were coming up with issues where the TC Helicon pedal had digital grounding issues where sometimes I'd play at zinc bar because the electrical wasn't grounded at zinc bar, where I would get like I'm sure you've heard this, like a USB distortion
Oh, wow.
because it's a digital pedal. So I'd have to put like a ground lift on so it would turn that lower. But then when I put another pedal in the chain, it would cause it to recycle back. So I would have all these issues depending on what club I was playing at. 55 bar wasn't so much of an issue, but it was like every venue was a different experience. Even if I had like a DI with a ground lift to deal with the electrical, it was just something to do with that pedal. So
Oh,
I don't use it so much these days, and I've sort of found some other pedals that I can do stutter effects with. But at the time, I was doing like the TC Helicon stutter effects, then with like a delay pedal in the mix. So I would build off of like having like one note and then trying to harmonize on top of it sometimes. And then
okay.
I remember I also had like a bunch of Strymon effects pedals on my board at the time. Like I had the Volante, which was a tape delay. I don't think I used it on that video. It's been a while, but it was a tape delay pedal where I could play certain things and then you could speed up or slow down the phrases you were playing. So if I had like one phrase, if I played really fast, I could slow it down. So it was like sounded like a foghorn or something. And
Oh,
then I could play at normal speed on top of it and do like
wow.
kind of experiment with like just layered effects and stuff.
That's really cool. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, I guess the way you find out about this stuff is, talking to people and checking out websites and seeing the types of things that you like.
Yeah, I mean, 55 bar was great for being able to experiment with all those things
Okay.
because I've definitely learned how to do more with less. And I think there's nothing, I don't regret any of the times where I would probably go nuts or be overkill with my effects because I was like learning on the bandstand because that band, we did a lot of gigs together, but we weren't really a rehearsing band. So most of what we did was just all in like on stage and just like trying to work things out each gig, listening to each other and stuff. And that was the only time I could practice my effects because I would iron out difficulties at home, and then like when I hung with like Douglas and stuff, he showed me a lot of things just with like EQ and like matching signals between different chains and stuff. He tried to push me in a direction that wasn't quite where I wanted to go, but I learned enough from the challenge point of where I wanted to go after the fact. Like I do some MIDI programming for some of my pedals, and like if I'm working with like an indie rock band, sometimes they use like software like Ableton Live, and indie rock bands will play tracks that way with live instruments. And so I'll ask them like, well, what's the click set to? 'Cause some of these, not all bands use click, but a lot of bands do for like pop kicks and stuff. And I'll dial in my delays and stuff to that click track, so I can
Okay.
do like MIDI stuff with that. But that's like extra level stuff. Players don't always think about these things, but for me, I want to think like a producer on top of like when I work with a band. Like for wedding band stuff, I try to make it fun. Like I was doing a lot of Tina Turner songs, like the old Tim Capello songs, like the Lost Boys sax player, where we do like, the best, simply the best, that song. And I would listen to it over and over and over again. I would learn his solo on it. And then I would use my effects rig that I brought to the gig. How can I mimic the sound of the recording? So if there was like certain reverb or certain timbre or how they EQ'd him, I would try to like create presets so that when I go to the gig, I can just turn that on and then give it that sound, like the studio sound.
That's
Because
pretty cool.
I would try to treat like some people, they go to a wedding gig and they're just like, it's my cash gig. I don't really care. I'm gonna show up, do the gig, go home. And for me, I would be like, I'm looking at that partially, but I'm also looking at it as an opportunity to how can I work on my craft while I'm here,
Mm.
and like and bring out my gear and like work on the mixes, work on the stuff. Like even if I'm not going to use crazy effects on the game, still be able to like mix myself and like make it sound more like a record, but like playing live and stuff.
Interesting. Okay. And so, like, even now, as you're doing wedding band gigs, as you're getting ready for the season coming up, certainly today's just
It
a,
it depends because some it really depends on the client and it depends on the band. I have really small rigs I can bring out, but I have gotten to a point as of late where it depends on my schedule and if the want and need is there and if I really like the crew. Because sometimes you don't want to just show up and bring a whole thing. I usually give a heads up to the band leader after a couple gigs before I just say, "Hey, I'm gonna just show up with all this stuff." Because like
Yeah, good
I've
point.
done that
Good point.
when I was younger, and it's not always like, "Okay, what's all this?" And it's just kind of like, we all have to like try to push the gamut at some point. Like I had a 3.5 year period of doing gigs on and off with Mike Stern at 55 Bar, and he's very much into horn players that are like out of the Brecker contemporary like generation.
Sure.
And I had that influence, but I also was trying to bring my aesthetic. And after a couple gigs, I had asked like, can I bring some effects out? Because he has other horn players that play with him that do use effects on stuff. And it took a bit, but I was able to do a couple gigs with it, and it just felt like at least he gave me the chance to like bring some of my elements into it. I mean, it didn't lead to any tours or anything, but like it was a good 3.5 years of like on and off, maybe like 12 to 15 gigs that I had done. And that was like another great 55 bar learning experience of just like being able to experiment with a legend and do his music and like just learn things on the gig and stuff.
But not only that, too, a really important point that I wanted to bring out, you know, if people are really interested in using pedals and effects, don't assume when you do a sub, as you're subbing on a gig or you're just getting started with a band, that they're going to be receptive to it at first. So
Yeah.
you got to get to know each other first, because most people are, not most, some people are not going to be used to that. And you want to start off on a good, with a good relationship.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing like punk rock or rock or whatever, and you say use pedals, they're generally gonna love it. I
Right.
haven't met, I have never met any. If it's like a commercial band, it's a whole other thing. Like if you're doing strict weddings, like you just have to feel it out. It's a kind of case by case basis.
Well, you did, I noticed you did some gigs with Lord Huron, right? Um,
Yeah, that was a couple things and a recording that I wish had turned into like a bigger thing. I really enjoyed working with them. But
hmm,
basically, I had a friend from college who gave me a call and put my name in the hat, and we did Seth Meyers, Beacon Theater, and a Spotify recording in like the course of like 4 days. It
oh,
was like
cool.
very much like a quick thing, but I was able to use my effects on the recordings that we did for Spotify. We did a cover of Harvest Moon and one of their songs, and it was great. It was just a really cool experience. I was able to use my rig. I was a little upset because a year later there was like a Rolling Stone article and it just said horn player with guitar effects, and I didn't get any name credit. And
Ugh,
I was like, oh, there it is. There's the humble card, because like sometimes the writers they don't go the extra mile for like trying to find out the names of everybody, and like Spotify doesn't show the liner notes for anything
that's
because it's
frustrating. That is
because
so annoying.
I've always fight for name credit for stuff, and some people would get annoyed about it, and now it's very commonplace, and people are very much like, oh, you got to get your recognition, because you see films that come out and there's no credit, and it's like full orchestras and no one's there's 100 players not getting credit in like a Netflix movie or something.
Yeah, it definitely
But it
frustrating.
was a really good experience. I mean, we did the recording, and then they called me for a thing called Live from Here, which was Chris Thiele was doing. It was the extension of trying to remember the previous host. It was like a long time running radio podcast show. Um, and then I did like some recording stuff at their own studio out in LA, and then that was about it because then COVID happened and
Yeah,
just kind of pushed everything to the wayside. So, but it was a great experience. Like I learned a lot playing with them for the times that I did.
cool. I have to ask this too because I loved REM, and so you worked with Michael Stipe?
Yep. And funny enough, I hadn't seen him in like 6 years, and I ran into him over the weekend, which was wild. He
Oh,
didn't
that's
rec
weird.
he didn't quite remember me, which I do not fault anyone at that level who I'm like, God forbid you could remember everybody, but a guitar player I've been fortunate to do 2 records with Alan Johannes, who's like super famous in his own right. He played with Queens of the Stone Age and his band 11 and stuff. We've worked on 2 records together, and he's passed me some work for some singer-songwriters, friends of his, and he had this wonderful band called Drink the Sea. I think that's the name of it. And put us on the list to go. And I didn't know what we were walking into. I had no idea what this band was going to be, but it was Alan and like some other heavy hitters from other bands, and Peter Buck, the guitarist from REM. And it was like this kind of Americana film music, very like dramatic, but very like through composed. And the set was 2 hours and 15 minutes solid, no break. It was just
Oh,
they had films playing behind them, and it was just it was amazing. But it was just like I was not prepared for this level of music. But in my head, I was like, oh, I wonder if Stipe's gonna be here. And then I saw him go to the bathroom when he came back. I tried to wave. He didn't see me. And then I went backstage with Alan after, and I was able to say hi. He didn't remember me, but it was totally cool. But it was just funny happenstance like so many years later to see him, because the record we worked on with this band Fisher Spooner, it was the last record for that band. They were like a huge band in the early 2000s for like club era stuff, and like had some really big hits in the electronic scene. But my friend called me up and said, I gave your name to an engineer, you might get a call, I think it's going to be big, you should probably go. And I was like, okay. And it was, this is a little context for a New York story. I did not have the best night that night. I got assaulted by a guy on the train. It was like a crazy dude, and it was like a whole thing. And I was at home icing my ribs because the guy just freaked out and tackled me for no reason. It was just a wild
oh
thing that
man.
happened on the train. And I'm literally like icing my ribs. I don't want to leave the house. I'm just like I'm having like a cocktail or two, and I'm just like I get this call, and they're like, "Hey, you play saxophone? Yeah. Can you come do this session?" And I was like, "Cool. When you need me to come?" And they're like, "Now." And
Oh,
I was like, "Oh dear. What do I do?" And I just was like, "Okay, sure." And they're like, "Yeah, okay, we'll send a car." Because I forgot at the time you could call Ubers ahead, which they hadn't. I did. That was like a new feature. Like I didn't know you could like send a car like that
oh,
from Uber. It was like when Uber first came to New York. It was like super early.
okay.
And then they're like, okay, car's gonna be downstairs in like 5 minutes. And I was like, oh, okay.
Oh
So
God.
I'm like, I don't have time to make a coffee or anything. And I just grab my stuff. I go, I get there, and the first person I meet is Michael. And he just
Wow.
like, nice to meet you. I'm like, okay, cool. And they're like, do you want some wine? Sure. And then I look at the engineer, the guy, the assistant engineer, and he's like, do you need anything? I was like, coffee. A lot of coffee. Just like trying to like wake up a little bit. So I'm like double fisting coffee and wine, and they just play me the track. I learned the parts on the spot. Um, it was a little like erratic for me because like I'm pretty slow with learning. So I'm like they weren't complicated stems that I had to listen to, but it was just like in the moment of like, what am I doing right now? I'm literally tracking this thing with Michael Stipe, this band I don't know, and he basically was like, give me this, which is what he wanted, and then he let me do some passes and just said, just do whatever you want to do.
Okay.
And I was like, I felt that was really awesome and respectful, and I've heard Bowie would do the same thing with like players in the studio where like he would have what he wanted, but always make sure to ask the player to give their input because you never know what the player is going to do. So I did that, and then said bye, and I got a call I think a couple weeks later to go back, and we did some more tracks, and then we did a couple shows. We did like Celebrate Brooklyn, we did Brooklyn Steel, and then they went on tour. Did not take me for that because it was just tracks. It was basically like guitar, tracks, drums, and the lead singer, and that was the band touring.
Wow.
So no horns on that.
What
But it
year
was
was
a wild experience.
what
Oh,
year
go
was
ahead.
this? What year was this?
That's a good question. That might have been 2015, 2016. Don't quote me on that. I have to go check when the record came out.
Okay.
But it was a while ago. But
That's cool. Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was for me, it was like not everybody could appreciate because the band, it was definitely like not a jazz thing, and just very much like a club scene band that was like huge and just like had a very intense audience. And I loved all the people I met doing those gigs, but it was very much like you tell jazz guys about it, they're like, it's just like, okay, it's like it's not the normal aesthetic.
Yeah, but you know what though? It's like, going back to the beginning, talking about like some of the music that you listened to, some of the 90s music, and REM was they were big
Yeah.
in the 80s, but also like, one of their biggest albums was in the 90s as well, so it's huge, it's definitely huge. And, even when you mentioned the Americana stuff before, and I could definitely get that. I can definitely see that. I'm curious, how did you come up with the name Saxophone Warrior?
So I used to run back when I didn't have Achilles tendonitis and I weighed a lot less from COVID and everything. But I was doing marathons very slowly, but I got into running, and I basically was looking for something that was not my name, Chris Ward, which was sort of I felt it was too average at the time, which coincidentally I'm flipping that right now, which I'll get into in a second. But at the time, I was like, there's so many Chris Wards. There's like surfers, hip hop rappers, like everything. Went online, I would see all these different names. And I was really into running and going to like run community meetups and stuff. And I just sort of had it. And I was like, this sounds pretentious, but I'm going to run with it
No pun
just because I
intended.
was like, it resonated with me. But like, it's not, I'm trying to have it not come from a place of like arrogance or something, but more of like, I was working on myself with running and doing something, and I wanted to kind of have a stronger thing. I had a hilariously bad caricature that I had for a while of like a He-Man version of me that I had an illustrator do with like a saxophone up in the air, and it was like I always laughed when I looked at it, and I was like, this is really bad. I'm like, I need to do something else, but it's like what I had. And then now my partner's a photographer, so we did a shoot recently. I sent you one of the shots of it that I'm very confident, I'm very happy with, and aesthetically just like feels more me than like my previous things I've worked on. But I've been doing my kind of like hyper focus on like hobby and stuff is like getting into watches, like the watch community and stuff, like wristwatches and things.
Hmm.
And I did some gigs for an English company called Christopher Ward. So I worked with them, and I have a couple of their pieces, and it's it's given sort of a new confidence towards, I guess, as I get older, trying to like love myself more, if you will, and sort
Okay.
of like looking at it of like I love Christopher Ward as a brand and what they do, and like we all connected really well on like working together, and it just sort of felt like okay, as I'm getting older, like this feels good, and it was kind of a funny how that came together, kind of happenstance thing, but
Yeah, and so it's a branding change, and it's really just bringing it back home when you think about it. But the funny thing is with the watch company, I was just thinking sponsorships and whatnot. But yeah, you said you worked with them. That's interesting. Actually, how rare is that? You know?
it's just been something because I go to a lot of their events. So I have a band I put together as a trio, and that's sort of the goal is to do more watch events and community stuff. Because at least it lets us bring our art into another form of art, and then sort of like combined the passions and stuff.
That's cool. No, that's some good stuff. I was wondering about that. So let's actually, you just mentioned that you're putting a band together and it's a trio, and I want to make sure I capture this, but what upcoming projects do you have for this year or next year?
Yeah, so I have a bunch of tracks I'm working on with a producer out in Los Angeles. His name is Riley Gear, and I met him through a friend of mine who was playing at this place, Bakari. LA folks will know that spot. They do a lot of live music and things. And I just went and I was sitting in and I met the drummer. We hit it off, and then I went back a couple months later and we started working on tracks of mine. We have like a kind of multi-album idea planned out. It's sort of timing and money and different things are factors, but we've gotten a couple tracks done, and it's sort of I wrote a bunch. I was trying to write every day for a year. It's probably like 4.5 years ago, and I wouldn't write in a conventional sense of like how a lot of jazz musicians per se would write, where I would take out staff paper and I would sit at a piano and just write stuff. I would just multi-track ideas I had. I would use my saxophone or keys or whatever and just sort of try to write almost like pop music ideas, just like whatever came to mind and just sort of try to multi-track those ideas in Logic because I'm not a very good multi-instrumentalist. I'm a very poor piano player and I just do my stuff with my pedals and things. But I took these demos to Riley and we had a good rapport because he is a multi-instrumentalist. He plays over 20 instruments really well. And like when we got in the studio, it was great because it was literally like I have my ideas and then he could just go in the other room and be like, all right, how about some bass? How about some drums? How about this? And just kind of track it all out. And then sort of like it was a good workflow. And so I a lot of my writing kind of has like thematic like film elements to it because I'm very into film.
Okay.
And so I'm gonna try to get it out this year in some fashion, but I've been making a lot of calls to people that work in like sync licensing for like film and TV because I'm not sure if I want to try to push this as like solo artist music or if I want to try to push this and try to get it into like the sync community. Because with sync, as I told you earlier before we started our session, is like you'll get told that they have to have a different mix altogether than what your release is because they might want to take certain stems, like they might want the bass stem or the drums and mix it differently because if it's for a commercial, they might want certain things to be different. So a
Okay.
lot of sync licensing companies might want to release your track themselves. So you might sign off certain percentage of your rights and certain things to them. I've heard very different experiences from very different people on what that entails, but I don't want to rush into putting something out because my records I do have out, I've never been like 100% happy with each. I'm glad they're out there, but it's like this one I really feel like I'm trying to treat it with care and patience and not just put something out to put it out because I want to connect it with the right audience. And if I can get it into a sync market, then I know like if let's just say dream scenario it gets used on a show or something, then I know I'll get more people hearing that and then someone might say, "Oh, I liked that. I want him to do more for me," or something. I don't know. I'm kind of riffing off the cuff of how it might work organically, but that's sort
Well,
of what I'm envisioning.
that's actually really cool. And I was actually there's a couple things I was going to mention. Can you, so let's say you have the seeds of something, right? Let's say you have a track, you have the seeds of something. If you, I mean, you own the rights, but you're saying like, let's say you want to sync that, maybe into a film or part of a TV show, and you have to sign. Do you totally sign away your
Every
rights?
company's different.
Okay.
But essentially what generally happens is your library of your songs are added to a bigger library. And then when people scour that or search it, if they happen to come across your stuff and they choose your stuff, then it'll get placed.
Right.
But
Right.
but it's still a basis of luck of like of who's going to push it if you have an agent that's pushing it or other things. But essentially I've heard different things. Like I think you always keep your publishing, but it depends on the deal.
Okay, got it. Okay. Yeah, you know what? Afterwards, I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions, and I don't, and also refer you to somebody as well, if you don't know about this person. But you know what I wanted to do, and I again thank you so much for your time. But let's do a little quick like NAM recap.
Yeah,
So
please. I think it was a great NAM. I think we had a really productive, there was a lot of stuff that happened and just connecting with people. Like I thought it was a good NAM.
it was good for me. Unfortunately, I could only be there one day this year. And that's the first time actually that I've missed most of NAMM since I started not just the podcast, but since I moved out to California. but my aunt turned 100, and so
Oh
the
my
whole family.
God. Wow.
Yeah, I know. So she wanted to go to Vegas, so the whole family, and we're talking a lot of people showed up, and my aunt's daughter, my cousin, she's well known in the industry of sports marketing and stuff like that. So, she knew a lot of people, and we had celebrity chefs and all that kind of thing. It was really cool. So I missed it
That's
for good
awesome.
reason. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, but it was cool to catch up with you. And then when Augie came, I didn't expect him actually. He didn't tell me that he was going to go to NAMM, but when he
Oh, he
first.
didn't? Yeah, I knew he was coming because I talked to his drummer and I made sure I wanted to bring him by the booth and like hang with them for a bit. So it was good to see them there.
No, it was cool. And because the thing is that the last time that he went, this was before, okay, so the story is that, I watched him as he was getting better and better. And I knew his mom. His mom worked in the same building as me. And so I watched him grow. And there was one point between ninth and 10th grade where it just clicked for him. And I said to him, and we talked about this on the podcast, I said, you know, you're going to be like the next Dave Koz, because he's got that it factor and he's got
Yeah.
the looks and he's got the sound and he's a humble person. He's a good guy. And so before people knew really what he could do, he came out to NAMM. He borrowed my Mark Six. He was playing at the Sios at the Sios booth in the back wall when I was doing the podcast with Rulon Brown and Key Leaves and stuff. And he was doing some stuff over there as well. So it was pretty cool. So I didn't expect him to be here this year. So that was great to see him again. It's been a while. And just hanging out with you guys and, going to a variety of the booths as well, but also
Yeah.
seeing him try out the Theo Wani mouthpieces, you know, and just some of the other stuff. But there's definitely like those cannonball saxophones. Oh my God. Those were,
Yeah, I tried a couple of those. I mean, I'm with Yamaha and I love my horns and we'll stay on them, but I tried a bunch of great stuff at NAMM, like the Eastman horns have come a long way. I
oh
remember when they
God, yeah.
first started.
Yeah.
The original ones I didn't gel with, but the Mincer horns that they worked on
Oh,
are fantastic.
yeah.
Um, the signature from Selmer, obviously, yeah.
The
There's
Trevor
always a
James.
bunch of
Trevor James,
yeah.
I play the Trevor James, I got my horn the same year that Adrian Crutchfield did. Like a whole bunch of us were there. But they've got an intermediate series that's really good. I tried that a couple of years ago, and they expanded their line to now have a soprano and Barry, which is great.
Mm.
But their horns are solid. I mean, I'm looking at my horn right now. This horn, I play this much more than the Mark Six. It's just so powerful, you know? I really love it. But those cannonball horns, and I interviewed Randall Clark as well. Man, they're just stunning. They're beautiful, and a lot of people really love the way that they played. That was cool. And then Jody's Quasar mouthpiece for alto sax. That's crazy. And again, I interviewed him, a bunch of people. Like I interviewed him at the very beginning of NAMM, and every person that tried it out, it's like sold, sold, sold. It was just kind of cool when you saw that.
That's
I don't know,
wild.
did you
Yeah,
get a chance to try those out?
I didn't try those out. I did say hi to Danielle. I didn't get a chance. I just because in the craziness, my second day was pretty wild. I was on the opposite side and like guitar and amp stuff and
Oh,
hanging
sure.
with some Yamaha family. So I did not get a chance to do. I had like my list of meetings and stuff, which I got to all of, but then just making sure I tried everything was sort of by like happenstance if I made it.
Yeah.
So there were definitely and I felt good about that because usually I remember one NAM I had all these ideas and then like I just got nothing done and I just like walked around. But this one was good and there was some exciting just like surprises. I had a really good time with the Odyssey or however you say it, their team for
Oh,
that
yeah.
MIDI controller. They were really nice people. And then with Better Sax, that team was really nice. All my friends that were on the other side for like Jazz Lab for the sax holder stuff, they're dear friends I've had for a while.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Although
but
Sylvan
yeah,
Sylvan wasn't there this year, so I was expecting him to be.
Sylvan was there.
Oh,
Sylvan
but not the first day
at
then.
Fred Van Dorn. He
No, no,
came.
no, Sylvan from Jazz Lab. So,
No,
One of
no, he was not there. Yeah.
yeah, that was the unfortunate thing. So
I forgot his name was that. No, I know both the girls. They're dear friends from Jazz Lab, but I only met um him once, so I've that's
oh,
why it didn't
okay,
click. I every time I think Sylvan at Van Doren,
that's
who's
right.
also a dear friend, so I keep forgetting.
Yeah, he's a great guy too. And I know they had a couple of new things out as well. There was a lot of great things. Unfortunately, though, a lot of the mainstays were not there. Right? I didn't see Sios.
Legier wasn't there.
Legier wasn't there. Rovner was not there either. I spoke to
I thought they were they not?
No, they weren't. I spoke to Lynn and George, and they were not there this year. I definitely missed them for sure. I definitely missed the people from Leger. I'm hopeful that they'll be back next year.
Yeah.
Unless they were
Well, they
there
don't do
the
the
next
jam
day.
anymore. Like no one's really doing
That
sessions
stopped.
anymore.
That
Yeah.
stopped a while ago. It was the cost of it too.
Yeah.
But like even the people at Barry Woodwinds, they weren't there. Like I said,
No, I wanted to try the reeds because I ran into Jason Arsa who plays their reeds. I wanted to try all the synthetics I could because I love my Regattis, but there are times where I wish I had a synthetic because to me soaking my reeds creates a stable variable
yeah, yep,
and
I
bass
get you.
line, and I was just like I would love it if I could just find a synthetic that could dial it in because like years back Legier used to be able to do like quarter cuts and like different things to dial in, and they don't do it anymore.
Mm.
And so I feel like I need to find a company where I can just be like, I need literally this, specifically this, and then maybe it'll work out. But it's hard to find that.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna just write a note to myself. We'll talk at the end
Yeah.
when it comes to that. No, for sure. And I mean, there was the biggest thing though, and I covered this in a previous episode. I did not expect this at all. I'm walking around the corner, and all of a sudden, I see Otto Link with Theo Warnig,
Yeah.
and Myers with Theo Warnig.
It
It's
it
like,
was an
whoa.
incredible surprise. I'm really excited for the team and
Mm,
just everything that's happening. They put a lot of work into it. Uh, with Matt and Brian and Theo, like it's really exciting, and I'm happy to see how it's going to grow because I love working with them, and the amount of work that they put in for everyone is like not everyone sees the back end of it, and like I
yeah.
think it's exciting.
Well, not only in that end, but if when you think about, and I was talking with Matt about this on the podcast, and even when I spoke with Theo too, it's like he's come full circle because he did all that work. He did
Yep.
all that kind of work, really studying and analyzing all these different mouthpieces, especially the Otto Links and the Myers. And now, right now, this partnership, this is the best thing that can happen. Truly, I think.
Well, it's also for legacy too. I mean,
Yeah,
I can't think of a greater company to improve and protect the legacy because I think a lot of us who weren't fortunate to come up in that era of like Florida Links and other things where what you got was at this incredible quality that when I was at Berkeley, because I never really got into links, but I did play them for a bit because everybody played them at some point was, you figured out what worked for you and didn't work for you. And every link I ever bought, it would be like the rails would either be uneven or something would be off. And like I think quality per year would be different. And
yeah.
now knowing that Theo's involved, everything is going to be perfect. Everything is going to be like every piece that goes out. There'll never be any issue of machine quality, anything. It's just going to be like his mastery, their legacy, and just perfection, which is super exciting.
And that's honestly, that's the goal of the NAMM show. It's not for people to brag, it's not for people to show off. It's for these companies to make these kinds of connections and to grow their businesses and to grow together. And that was just really that blew me away. I couldn't have even predicted that. And Matt was saying to me, I've been dying for months trying to say
Yeah.
something and he couldn't, and it's like big relief for him, Matt Ambrose, to talk about that. I'm really happy for them. It definitely it was a good show. Definitely a lot more people than the previous year. It's still not at pre-COVID levels, but it's what people don't understand. It's insanely expensive to have a booth
Yep.
at NAMM. And that's why like some of the people that normally are there were not there. And that's the shame of it though. That's the other thing too. Like they you know,
Well,
they're
the
making it
industry's
better
in
for them.
flux right now because everything's going to e-commerce and no one's really sure of the investment points because also, especially in our industry, if you're an instrumentalist, it's still technically the smaller part of the industry of a whole when it comes to the music industry because like
Yeah.
accessory sales is a huge part, but you look at the other side of the NAMM hall where it's like the metal companies and you've got, the amp companies, guitar, and more money is still put there than what's necessarily happening on the other side with like jazz or other instrumental type of music. So I think it's great and we're still fortunate to be able to see that we still have a place for like if we're not doing all the pop gigs and the other things, like it's just the fact that at least we're there is what matters.
Yeah, and I just know also as a trumpet player, I see less and less brass stuff. I
Yeah.
was really that really hit me this year. It's a shame because it's not fair. And I barely
I mean, BAC is still there. I think they had a booth and but you have a good point though. Like Shires, I don't think is ever there. I don't know who owns Shires these days or like what's
I don't either, but
I'm not caught up on what all the brass brands are right now.
yeah, but it's just, the thing is that if you're a brass player, there's like less choices,
Hmm.
and it's a shame. It really is. But, you know, like the NAMM show, it's great to go to because at least for me, I become friends with a lot of the owners of these companies and, they're wonderful people and just I love bringing that to people. I love saying, "Hey, this is new. This is what's coming up. Check it out." All the work I know that Jody Espina puts into everything. He's just incredible. And the same with everybody else. I love, showcasing that because that's so important. But it's also it's distressing when I hear how people can't be there with a booth because it's so freaking
Yeah.
expensive, and I guess the reminder is too, I mean, NAMM isn't about it's about these companies making the connections. And to be honest with you, like not seeing like a peak music stands there or even Sios I didn't see, which is shocking, just shocking. But, not seeing those companies there, it doesn't allow them to maybe make some more connections, with people. It's a shame. It really is. And I do hope that maybe next year they'll come back. That would be awesome. But listen, Chris, I wanted to thank you so much for your time. This was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun hanging out at NAMM, but this was really
Yeah.
cool to do some more catching up, but also to, see what's going on with you and stuff. So thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you, Donna. I know we've talked about this for a handful of years now, so I'm glad we finally got to sit down and chat.
Cool. Awesome.